this is actually from the Vanguard's website. Vanguard is one of the two largest capital, investment firms. Them and BlackRock own just about everything in this world. They're the top three shareholders of everything: mainstream media, weapons contractors, oil, banks, all of it. They own our system. And so that's why Vanguard might be concerned if the US dollar were to start waning in power. The article says, despite a decline over the past 2 decades in the share of US dollar denominated securities holdings from 71% in 1999, now it's down to 58%. That's 2022, so it's probably down a little more from then. This article is not taking into account the idea that Saudi Arabia and OPEC would abandon the petrodollar. And so they claim, Vanguard is trying to say, don't worry, the dollar's still safe. If you look at this graph here, the dollar is still most of the world's reserve currency, almost 60%. And even if it drops below 50%, no other currency will be competing with it. But that's quickly not becoming true. And as that happens, the U.S. will not be able to print all the money in the world without any impact. And this could, it seemingly have to result in a pretty steep decline of the U.S. empire. We just wouldn't have $1 trillion to spend on military every year, plus the $21 trillion of unaccountable adjustments in the military's budget as well. Here is the only Western article I could find that had anything to do with this, but this one does not use the word petrodollar. It's from Yahoo Finance. It says a shift away from the US dollar is happening in real time and investors must be ready. I love how they just make it about because investors means rich, right? That doesn't mean that there aren't non-rich people investing, but 93% of all stocks in the United States are owned by the top 10%. 93%. They don't care about what this means for the world, whether this is good for the world. Maybe the U.S. empire ruling over everybody else and causing millions of deaths every year via our weapons and in other regards, in other ways, via capitalism. They don't care about any of that. They just say, hey, investors, you better be ready. The U.S. dollar is decreasing in power. U.S. dollar's dominance is in decline as Russia and Saudi Arabia eye the Chinese yuan for oil trades and blame it on Russia and China, when in fact it's just the behavior of the United States that has put us here. I think the decline of the U.S. empire would be a good thing. Maybe we should let other countries be actually sovereign. Maybe we should let them behave how they want to behave. Maybe we should let them have the systems they want to have. Maybe we don't need to steal all the resources from every other goddamn country. One of the most significant but underreported outcomes of April's 3-day summit between Russia's Putin and China's Xi Jinping was that Putin said Russia is now in favor of using the Chinese yuan for oil settlements. This suggests that the world's second largest economy and the world's largest energy exporter are actively intending to reduce the dominance of the US dollar as the bedrock of international financial systems. If you think about that statement, what is it that has caused Russia to run so quickly to China and to say, yeah, we were slowly moving towards China anyway, but we want to move right now and we want to get this done now? Russia, China working together very closely, economically and otherwise. Why did that happen? Oh, did it have something to do with the massive sanctions that the U.S. has put on Russia because of the proxy war that the U.S. created in Ukraine? Could that be it? So in fact, the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine has helped facilitate the end of the petrodollar, the end of U.S. economic hegemony. So I guess if you think about it that way, all of a sudden I like the proxy war in Ukraine. No, I'm anti-war, but for those of you who go, hey, the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine's actually been good for facilitating and speeding up the decrease of the U.S. empire, the decrease of the U.S. petrodollar, you would be correct in saying that. Russia's running to China. They're now working together much more closely than they were. Additionally, a shift away from the U.S. dollar in oil trading could lead to greater economic and geopolitical competition between the countries. If the yuan were to become more widely used in oil trading, this could significantly increase the economic power and influence of China, challenging the dominance of the U.S. in major global affairs. If you look at the countries the U.S. has invaded has like bombed the ever living shit out of, has utterly destroyed in recent years. If you look at the ones that the US has really centered, US government has centered their ire towards and been willing to fully invade and destroy, not just soft coup, not just lightly take out their leader with lawfare. We're talking bombs raining down. It is mainly oil companies, oil countries, and exclusively, I think, countries that have dropped the petrodollar. Libya dropping the petrodollar. Iraq had dropped the petrodollar. Syria had dropped the petrodollar. And then there's also other ones that are slightly different, where you look at like Venezuela. They're not on the petrodollar, but they have massive oil reserves that they've not been able to fully, quote unquote, exploit or extract. And the U.S. wants to stop them from being able to extract that. So that's why Venezuela, there's several other socialist countries, but Venezuela is the one that the U.S. has really centered a lot of anger towards and tried to coup multiple times and pretended Juan Guaido was the president, even though he'd never received a single vote for president in Venezuela. So I just wanted to throw that in there, that the countries that the U.S. really attacks almost always have dropped the petrodollar and generally have oil or access to oil reserves in a large way. Iran is a good example of a country the U.S. has attacked again and again. Large oil reserves, not using petrodollars. They are major trouble for the petrodollar system. All that being said, here's the aspect that I can almost guarantee you no one else will bring you. Climate crisis is largely due to fossil fuels. Yes, animal agriculture is one of the largest causes of climate crisis as well, when you include deforestation and everything in that equation. But let's just stick with fossil fuels for the moment. Fossil fuels, number one cause of a climate crisis, still being used around the world in a very large way. We've blown through all of the climate summits we signed, the Paris Accord that we signed, that big banks were cheering, all of that stuff that Trump tore up and Biden's fine with continuing not being a part of, but it didn't really matter anyway. And the liberals, by the way, who claim to care about climate change, were really upset when Trump tore up the Paris Climate Accords. But here's the thing, the Paris Climate Accords, how many countries are actually abiding by the Paris Climate Accords? I think the number is like 2, and of those, like, they're tiny. It's like, Maldives or something, which is going underwater. We've blown through we're going to stop using fossil fuels in a week, in a year, in 2 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, all of that bullshit. Part of the reason, maybe one of the biggest reasons, is that the U.S. has an existential reason to want fossil fuels to be used around the world. Our currency is based on fossil fuels. It's not just big oil. Yes, big oil is a huge problem, and they own our government in many regards, but it's not just big oil. Big oil could also make money from some solar panels or something. It has to do with it being the heart of the U.S. currency. We need petroleum to flow, or U.S. currency goes flippity flop. Again, that means that this could be Saudi Arabia dropping the petrodollar and other countries being able to move to forms of green energy. And I know green energy is not perfect, but it's much better than what we got. It could mean the difference between life and death for the human species in a few decades. Now, some of you may go, well, if they're switching to yuan, China is one of the largest oil users in the world, fossil fuel wise. So it's no different, right? Okay, use yuan, use US dollars. What's it matter? Well, there's 2 reasons it matters. One is China's currency is not premised on the fact that petroleum is to keep flowing. Like, China doesn't fail if petroleum stops flowing. But beyond just that, China, the way they make their calculations in terms of what that country is going to do long term is not like the U.S. The U.S. is looking for short-term gain. The U.S. companies that run our country want the money in a matter of weeks and months. The U.S. does not plan 10 years down the road. The U.S. does not plan 20 years down the road. If we did, we would see that climate crisis is destroying everything. I mean, in Mexico right now, monkeys are falling out of the trees dead. Simple science. Like, things have to live on the earth. Not everything can just live inside air conditioning. We're all going to huddle in a freezer box and we'll be fine. It doesn't work like that. Okay, so back to how the U.S. does not plan more than a few months down the road. If we're lucky, we plan a year down the road. And usually it's planning a year down the road on how we're going to destroy some other country. But here is even the New York Times back in April about President Xi of China and the Chinese system. This isn't just President Xi, but Chinese system. President Xi is making a decades-long bet that China can dominate the global transition to green energy. His ultimate goal is not just to address one of humanity's most urgent problems, climate change, but also to position China as the global savior in the process. Now, you may not want China to be the global savior, but you probably want there to be an Earth in a few years. And here's the thing. If we were to also start behaving like China and actually planning 10 and 20 years down the road for the health of all the humans that, even if you're just talking about the health of the humans that live within the U.S. borders, I mean, really, we should want humans around the world to be healthy, but whatever. We could also be doing this. The U.S. government could also be planning for humanity, but we don't, because the way our system works is just pure greed, pure how much money am I making a few months from now, maybe a year from now. And as I've said before, just a couple of months ago, the U.S. made a big stink about China creating overcapacity, meaning China's creating too many things, and so we're going to put massive tariffs on them, and we're going to stop those things from being sold here. But we didn't say overcapacity on all things, right? Because the U.S., look around you guys. Are you in the U.S.? How much of your stuff is made in China? 94%. The U.S. government doesn't want to stop all stuff from getting here from China because that would be everything Americans own. No, the U.S., including Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, said basically three things were overcapacity. We've got to stop three things: electric vehicles from China, batteries from China, and solar panels from China. The three things that are needed to switch off of fossil fuels. If China is evil and overcapacity and hurting U.S. goods, why is it those three things that the U.S. is focused on? We got to stop those things. And yes, you would be certainly correct in saying all of these things have environmental impact and environmental problems. Yes, they do. I'm not denying that. But compared to the global emissions we're pumping out right now with fossil fuels, the evils of green energy are far smaller. It's just simple science.